Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I'm John Macri, and I'm joined by PFF's lead fantasy analyst, the great Nathan Jahnke. Nate, we are live once again on the YouTubes and the Twitterverse after, another wild week in the NFL, more bye weeks on the horizon. Injuries never go away. So, Nate, what do you say we break down some waiver wire targets to help the good folks get ready for week 6?
Yeah, that sounds good after having 15 and a half hours of football on Sunday and then a game that was from last night, but it felt like it was from 2017, 2018 with the way Kareem Hunt and Juju Smith-Schuster were playing. So interesting week of football and definitely interesting waiver wires this week.
Yeah, never fails to surprise us, I guess, the NFL. And it's nice to always get some, names from the past flashed in there as well and see, some of those names we'll be talking about today. Well, at least one of them for sure. But yeah, another, it was a fine Monday Night Football game. Nothing too exciting. It was good nonetheless. But we'll break down all these waiver wire targets here. And again, we're live on Twitter and YouTube. So feel free to ask questions in the chat. We'll kind of get to them as we go through our list here, potentially saving them some of them till the end. But we'll also reference rostership numbers, which are pulled from ESPN. And then you could reference Nate's article, waiver wire article over on PFF.com, which you can get access to with a PFF Plus subscription, as well as the many other valuable tools and resources over there. So be sure to check that out with a PFF Plus subscription. But without further ado, let's start things off with the running back position, Nate, where maybe the number one waiver wire target this week, because he's rostered in just 9.5% of ESPN leagues. Tank Bigsby of the Jacksonville Jaguars had himself a day in week 5. So how are we feeling about him or this Jacksonville backfield right now?
I think for Bigsby, it's been very interesting. He's played extremely well so far this season, among the highest graded running backs, among the most elusive running backs so far this season. The first 8 or so drives, we saw a pretty typical rotation of running backs for Jacksonville. Travis Etienne was seeing his usual amount of playing time. It was right around 60%. He had been closer to 65 to 70% for most games this season, so it was just slightly low for him, but it seemed pretty normal. And then Bigsby had his 19-yard touchdown run, got some help from the offensive line to get in there, but it was an impressive run nonetheless. And then from that point on, it was mostly Bigsby the rest of the way. Ran 6 more times over the rest of the game, gained 76 yards on those carries, another touchdown, and Etienne didn't touch the ball again from that point on. There have been reports that Etienne is still the guy, but it also sounds like he's dealing with an injury. But even if Etienne is fine, Bigsby has been playing so well that it's hard to not keep him playing more and more often than what he's been playing. The clear lead rusher for Jacksonville the last 2 weeks, and his talent alone, we thought this could happen last year, and it didn't quite happen last year because Bigsby had some kind of comically bad drops that ended up being interceptions. So the turnovers meant he was rarely playing last year, but it seems like he's gotten a lot better in his second year, and this is the Bigsby we thought we would see last year.
Yeah, and I think that's why his rostership is still kind of pretty low here, right? I think people are hesitant because of, all this talk last year that he was going to take over, and it just never really happened, right? So, seeing it 1 week and just slowly here, but now 2 weeks in a row where we've seen him kind of work his way in. And like you said, Travis Etienne potentially dealing with a shoulder injury as well. So kind of impossible to ignore at this point for Etienne and for Bigsby as well. So I think that rostership is going to jump up quite a bit here in the next week. But after Tank Bigsby, we had another, potential injury situation to deal with because Devin Singletary didn't play in week 5. He was dealing with a groin injury. So Tyrone Tracy of the New York Giants ended up having a really productive game, ran 18 times for 129 yards. So he was actually the first Giants running back to crack 100 rushing yards this season. So he moves up the waiver wire list as well this week, Nate.
Yeah, he almost completely took over Devin Singletary's role, but we did see Eric Gray, who is also known as a third down back. Gray took over for third downs in this game. So Tracy didn't quite see as much playing time as Devin Singletary had been playing, but Tracy is someone that we had mentioned a bit basically each episode near the end of the running backs because he was seeing slightly more playing time each week and playing decently well in that time. Right now, looking over the entire season, Singletary still grades out slightly better than Tracy. Tracy, part of the reason he did so well this week was just the volume of rushing. So even though he was the first 100-yard rusher, I don't think that necessarily means Tracy has been more impressive than Singletary, but it's been pretty even. So I at least wouldn't be surprised if Tracy continues to see more playing time. Probably more so interested in that maybe by midseason, Tracy takes over as the lead running back. It's even possible it happens sooner if they like Tracy more than Singletary at this point. But I'm probably picking him up not so much because I think I can start him in the short term, but because of that long-term potential of maybe he takes over. And there's also a chance that Singletary misses another week with his groin injury or two. So also certainly possible that Tracy can get put back in fantasy starting lineups in the immediate future as well.
Yeah, for sure. If Singletary misses another game, I think Tracy makes a lot of sense here. Looked pretty good at least for this game, but yeah, like you pointed out in the usage there, didn't play much on like the passing downs or get a lot of the goal line work there, but still the volume alone, it was pretty nice for Tyrone Tracy to be a potential starter here for us if Devin Singletary misses another week. Next up in Miami, where Devon Achane left this game early with a concussion. So we got an increased role for some of the other Miami running backs. We knew Raheem Mostert was going to see more snaps, but Jalen Wright got in the mix as well this week, Nate.
Yeah, it was an interesting week because Mostert was back, and then Devon Achane got injured pretty early in this game, a concussion, so would not be surprised if he misses a game. Even before the game started, it was a little good to see for Wright that Jeff Wilson was inactive for this game. Earlier, it was Wright that was the fourth running back, and now it's clear that Wilson's the fourth running back, and Wright's at least third on the depth chart now. And then through this game, Mostert was the primary running back, particularly in passing situations, but also in rushing situations. It was a decently even split. But we did see Wright play well as a runner, ran 13 times for 86 yards. And so far on the season as a whole, Devon Achane hasn't been running as well as we thought he would. Mostert's been fine, but also not as good as last year. But to be fair, he was just coming back from an injury. But Wright's been the most effective runner for Miami so far. He's graded out the best of the three running backs as a runner, gaining a first down on 20% of his carries, where Achane's just 14%, Mostert's 12%. More yards per carry, more avoided tackles per carry, all those kinds of things. So I think Wright's the kind of player that if you want to gamble at running back, if you're okay with the fact that Wright, there's a chance that he's just back to the third running back and we see more of a two-man committee with Wright not seeing much playing time, it's certainly possible Miami does that at running back going forward. But it's also possible that since the situation's been fluid, over the last couple of years, we've seen Miami change who the starting running back is a number of times. So there's definitely a chance that Wright becomes that number one running back in Miami at some point as well. So there's a wide range of possibilities. So if you're not necessarily looking for a running back specifically for this week and just want to take a chance of someone who could have a lot of value late in the season, then I think Wright's a right player to pick.
Nice. I like that. But yeah, I think Miami, they are going to be on a bye week this week. So Achane, we figure will be healed up by week 7. But like you said, like this Miami backfield, that we've seen the rotation there before. We've seen them switch guys up and who's getting the most playing time and stuff like that. So definitely kind of worth the shot in an explosive offense for taking a shot on Jalen Wright as the rookie there. Okay, so an interesting situation in New England. We got news kind of before this week's game that Ramondre Stevenson was going to be benched, but kind of not really. Scores a touchdown early in the game, but Antonio Gibson still seeing some value, Nate. So what did this Patriots backfield look like?
Yeah, if you just looked at the box score, it looked like nothing happened. Gibson just got the first carry, and then Stevenson scored a touchdown and ended up with more carries. So if you just looked at the box score, it didn't look like much, but there was a bit more to the benching in this game. Just looking at how the players were used, we saw Gibson take all of the snaps on the first drive. The only thing is there were 2 sacks on the drive, so it was a 3 and out. So Gibson's drive did not last very long. And then Stevenson came in for the second drive. Not too surprising, it was a by-drive rotation, and then Stevenson broke that 30-plus yard touchdown on that drive. Gibson did come back for the third drive, so they did continue the rotation. Penalties kind of derailed that third drive, so we really didn't see much of Gibson there, but it was still that rotation by drive over the first 4 drives. Stevenson did get both the fourth and the fifth drive, since the fifth drive was a 2-minute drill, and that's generally been a situation for Stevenson this season. And then in the second half, we also saw Gibson see more playing time than Stevenson. It was 20 snaps to 15. So we've seen, even though this is the first game where Gibson was the starter, the last 3 weeks we've seen Stevenson only play roughly around 50% of the offensive snaps, which is a bit lower than what we saw last year. And in terms of PFF grades and number of stats, Gibson has been the better running back so far this year. Part of the grade stuff is the fumbles, but in other stats as well, at both rushing and receiving, it's been Gibson. So I would not be surprised if we continue to see closer to a 50-50 split going forward, even if Stevenson does return as the starter in the offense. But I think Gibson continues to see significant playing time. I think there's a chance Gibson becomes more of a clear starter in the future based on the way the two running backs have been playing. And even though they spent a lot of money on Stevenson with an extension this offseason, they did pay Gibson a decent amount of money for a backup running back. He is making more than other free agent running backs who are signed this offseason, guys like Zach Moss, who's been the starter in Cincinnati, and guys like that. So they did invest a decent amount in Gibson. So I think it wouldn't be surprising if he continues to have a decent role in this offense.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And yeah, I think, just we have different definitions of the word benched from Gerard Mayo, I think, right? Like you clarified it much better there. It more of a role reduction for Ramondre Stevenson than, a flat out benching, which it sounds a lot scarier where it sounds like the guy's just not going to play. But Stevenson did get on the field. Gibson increased his role. So that was nice to see for Antonio Gibson, and definitely makes him useful. Like you said, they did invest in him. So, could be some changes there. In Las Vegas, Zamir White was out for week 5. He didn't play. So Alexander Mattison stepped into the lead role. We had seen him be surprisingly efficient in previous games. Not so much this week with a larger workload, but Alexander Mattison still led the way in this Raiders backfield.
Oh, yeah. Even without the injury, we had been told by Antonio Pierce that Madison would have a larger role after, particularly in week 4, he had a very good game. This week, he didn't do much with his carries, only averaged 2.5 yards per carry, so that wasn't great. He was the clear running back for the first 3 quarters of this game, played 39 of a possible 48 snaps. So even though the graphs make it look like it was pretty mixed for those first 3 quarters, it was pretty clearly Madison's backfield, but things weren't working out. So they made changes at quarterback in the 4th quarter. They also made a change at running back in the 4th quarter. We saw Amir Abdullah take over and play all the snaps in the 4th quarter. There was the 2-point conversion where Madison was in, but it was both running backs on the field for that play, and Madison got the 2 points there. But I don't know what the Raiders backfield will look like going forward. They're trying to make a decision at quarterback. They're probably similarly trying to make a decision at what to do with the running back position. For me, I still think Madison's probably the most likely guy to have fantasy value in this backfield in the immediate future, since we've seen multiple games where Zamir White wasn't effective, where it's just primarily been this one game where Madison wasn't effective. There's also a chance that Amir Abdullah could be the primary running back next week after what we saw in the 4th quarter. Hopefully we get some news out of the Raiders on that, even like Dylan Labe, who had been inactive as the 4th running back the first couple weeks. He was active, didn't see any playing time. Maybe there's a chance he also gets involved. So particularly in deep leagues, I might be interested in picking him up, but there's a chance that someone in the Raiders backfield might have some fantasy value this season, but generally at least one running back on each team should be rostered. And right now, I think Madison's the guy in Las Vegas to roster.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think that makes the most sense as well. And yeah, Raiders got a lot to figure out. They got to figure out quarterback, figure out this backfield, and most importantly, probably figure out what they're doing with Devontae Adams. So we'll wait to see what happens there. But another injury situation to kind of monitor here in Minnesota. Aaron Jones got banged up this week in the London game. I know they're on a bye week this week, so we won't necessarily know like the extent of the injury immediately, but Ty Chandler stepped in and led the way the rest of the way with Aaron Jones out, Nate.
Oh yeah, early in the game it was the very usual rotation out of Minnesota. It was a lot of Aaron Jones early. It was right around the time that Tad Chandler would typically start to rotate in. That's when Jones suffered his injury, so we didn't get much of a change in the backfield rotation. I did note in the recap article a week ago, we saw Ty Chandler see that big dip in playing time. I would not be at all surprised if last week a big part of that was Aaron Jones was playing his former team in the Packers, and they wanted Aaron Jones to be able to have a big game. So I didn't read too much into that dip in playing time by Chandler in week 4. And then, like you said, Jones suffered the injury. It was Chandler for most of the rest of the way. Myles Gaskin was the backup. He's been with the team for over a year now. So I think they're comfortable with Gaskin being the primary backup. And then their fullback, CJ Ham, has been playing some of the third downs on and off for the past 2 years. That continued to happen a bit in this game as well, but that's still a big enough role where Chandler, if he's the starter, should at least be seeing double-digit carries, at least a couple receptions in there as well. So like you said, they have the bye week, and then Jones very well could be healthy and back by then. But on the off chance that he's not, it's always good to get a running back who's going to be a clear starter at some point. So on the off chance that that does happen, I'd rather pick up Chandler now rather than wait to hear more news, and then someone else could very well pick up Chandler before you get to them.
Yeah, I'm with you. Okay, so Kansas City obviously leaned heavily on Kareem Hunt last night, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire still eligible to return from his stint on short-term IR, dealing with the PTSD stuff. They also have a bye week here in week 6, so gives them a little bit of extra time to potentially return. But we still have a chance that Clyde Edwards-Helaire could work his way into this backfield if and when he does return, right, Nate?
Yeah. So last night we saw a pretty typical rotation out of Kansas City. First, it looked a little more like last year. Then it looked a little more like early in the season where Kareem Hunt was the lead running back, was rotating a bit with Carson Steele early in the game, but then late in the game, it just became Kareem Hunt running the ball over and over. Would not be surprised if Carson's fumbles played a role in that, and that Kansas City was just trying to run out the clock and go from there. So I think it's still going to be a kind of a two-man rotation on the early downs, and then Samaje Perine has basically only played in the passing downs now. I think he'll be stuck there. So once Edwards-Helaire is back, he did return to practice this past week. So after the bye week, I would not be at all surprised if Edwards-Helaire is back on the active roster. I think initially he will probably only be taking playing time from Carson, but I think over time it wouldn't be surprising if Clyde Edwards-Helaire also starts taking playing time from Kareem Hunt. It's entirely possible that Edwards-Helaire becomes the starter as well, even though Kareem Hunt had a lot of rushing yards, got over 100 yards. He also ran the ball a lot, so he wasn't necessarily overly effective running the ball. He just got a lot of volume in the offense. So I think it's going to remain a fluid situation in Kansas City. So I think on the off chance Clyde Edwards-Helaire does become the starter, there's a chance that he could have a game like Kareem Hunt had last night where he's getting over 100 yards because Kansas City's just running out the clock over the rest of the game. So I think he's worth considering just on the chance that he has a good role in Kansas City's offense.
Yep, definitely wouldn't rule that out at all. Yeah, looking at Kareem Hunt, his longest run was 8 yards, 27 carries, though 102 yards, and then he got the touchdown as well. But yeah, definitely room for them to potentially improve there if Clyde Edwards-Helaire is back and ready to go. So definitely a name to keep in mind. And then in Chicago, we talked about this two-man backfield last week for Roschon Johnson, who's still rostered in just 11% of leagues. We didn't see really any signs of Khalil Herbert getting, taking any of those short yardage situations or things like that. So like Shane Waldron had kind of indicated, so still two-man backfield here for the Bears, Nate?
Oh, yeah, still the two-man backfield, and usually Roschon Johnson, who's the receiving back. Receiving backs don't often have a ton of fantasy value, but the reason that Johnson is probably considered more than other receiving backs is because of that goal line and short yardage work. It's been a pretty clear mix between the two in both goal line and short yardage situations over these past 2 weeks. So I think Johnson will continue to have opportunities to score touchdowns. So the big thing there is in some of these deeper leagues where there's a lot of bye weeks and you might not have great opportunities at running back, I think Johnson's someone who can fit into fantasy starting lineups. And he's also the handcuff that if something were to happen to DeAndre Swift, Swift has looked good over these past 2 weeks, so it doesn't look like Swift is going to be losing any significant playing time anytime soon. But if that does happen, then I think Johnson would be the guy. I know Herbert did mix in a little bit, but I believe that was all on kneel downs near the end of the game. So I don't think Herbert saw any meaningful playing time in this game.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like he's going to be that much of a factor there. But for the Rams, we did start to see the rookie Blake Corum get a little bit more work, and we've talked about him before as a potential handcuff here for Kyron Williams, rostered in 20% of leagues. Seems like the Ronnie Rivers experiment is potentially over there. So how are we feeling about Blake Corum going forward, Nate?
Oh, yeah, definitely feeling a little better after the first 4 weeks when Rivers was the clear backup. Corum only had a couple of snaps over those first 4 weeks, and it was all within the last couple of minutes of a blowout game. So Corum hadn't seen any significant playing time. But in this game, he was a clear backup, was seeing a couple of snaps here and there throughout the game. So just whenever Kyron Williams needed a break. So now Corum is kind of back to the guy that we thought we might see at the start of the season, where if anything were to happen to Kyron Williams, then it would be Corum who would likely see a very significant role. Still a little concerned that if that were to happen, we would still see Ronnie Rivers mix in a decent amount. It's hard to know exactly how the split would work out at this point of time, but I think since Corum is back to being the primary backup, at least in a good situation where if something were to happen to Williams, and he's available in a lot more leagues now because a lot of people have dropped him over the past 4 weeks. So if you're looking for a handcuff, I think Corum is a fairly good option.
Nice. And then a player that we talked about last week, Keaton Mitchell, was kind of our like just in case type ad. Anything change for you here with Keaton Mitchell in the Ravens backfield?
Not really. No, we've heard he's like still on a good pace to get back by the middle of the season. So he's just going to be a handcuff who played very well last season. There's no guarantee he gets back to being the player that he was, but among the players who are available in over 95% of ESPN leagues, I think he has the best shot of having a strong second half of the season.
Nice. All right, quick ad break here, and then we will move to the wide receivers. TD, Tutty, taking it to the house, in for 6, whatever you call a touchdown. One thing's for sure, touchdowns matter more at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. On the ground, in the air, from the special teams or defense, we don't care how they score them. We want to bet on touchdowns, and DraftKings Sportsbook is the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Ready to place your first NFL bet? Try betting on something simple like a player to score a touchdown. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your bet today. Ready to do a touchdown dance of your own? New DraftKings customers can bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Score big with DraftKings Sportsbook, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Download the Sportsbook app and use code PFF. That's code PFF for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5 only at DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly on behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, Kansas. 21 plus, age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/ftball. All right, Nate, let's talk about some wide receivers. We're heading into bye week, so we're potentially not, well, we're not going to have Justin Jefferson. We're not going to have Tyreek Hill, no Jalen Waddle, no Juju Smith-Schuster either, but that doesn't mean that he can't be picked up here after a nice big performance on Monday Night Football. We saw a role increase with Rashee Rice out and obviously Hollywood Brown out as well. So how you feeling about Juju after his kind of first week here without Rashee Rice in the lineup?
Feeling fairly good about him. We did get confirmation Rice is out for the season, so Smith-Schuster should be among the starters in Kansas City going forward. They use Xavier Worthy, Justin Watson, and Smith-Schuster on the vast majority of plays. It's what they did immediately after the injury after Rice's injury last week, and it was pretty much the same rotation this week. If anything, they were rotating the wide receivers out less often than they were the week before. So we saw less of Nicole Hardman and Sky Moore than we did last week, which was good news for Smith-Schuster. It meant more playing time for him this week. And he was the clear primary target among the wide receivers. Travis Kelce continues to get a lot of targets as well. So I think Kelce should be just fine for the rest of the season with Rice out. But really, Justin Watson is someone who I don't think saw any targets last night, at least didn't see targets for most of the night. And he has the third lowest target share among wide receivers over the past 3 years. So it's not surprising that Watson isn't going to be a huge factor in the offense, even though he's on the field. And then Xavier Worthy, he's someone who catches deep passes and then also some of those shorter passes behind the line of scrimmage, ran the ball for a touchdown as well. So I think Worthy will definitely be involved in the offense, but I don't see him being someone who's going to see double-digit targets in any game. I think he's just going to be used for some specific plays that can always be big plays. But I think out of the three wide receivers, Smith-Schuster is the one who can see a lot of targets in games. And he caught 7 of them for 130 yards in this game, and also was at least targeted in the end zone once, which led to an interception. So it's not great that it led to an interception, but they at least trust him in the red zone, which is also good to see. So a chance he'll score some touchdowns going forward. So I think out of all the wide receivers in Kansas City, he's the one to have. And last year we talked about Kansas City wide receivers on a weekly basis because we know whoever was Patrick Mahomes' favorite target was going to have a ton of fantasy production. And right now that's Smith-Schuster.
Yeah, and available in over 95% of ESPN leagues as well. So after a big game there on Monday Night Football, I imagine that goes up even with the bye week here, as we want to get ahead of that and obviously get a piece of Patrick Mahomes' receiving core. Another interesting name here, Nate, and one we've talked about quite a bit, but Josh Downs, now 21 targets over the last 2 weeks for the Indianapolis Colts, rostered in 35% of ESPN leagues and continuing to look like a potential fantasy starter here.
Yeah, he scored 19.1 fantasy points over the past 2 weeks, which is 13th best at the position. So has done very well, is the clear slot receiver, doesn't play much in 2 wide receiver sets, but Indianapolis runs a lot of 11 personnel, so that's not too much of a problem for them. I think the big thing here is I know a lot of people, when I've hyped up Downs, especially after the early and afternoon game Sunday, he was the clear wide receiver to target off the waiver wires. And a lot of people mentioned that he's not going to have as much value once Anthony Richardson is back. But I would mention he has had over 30% targets per route run in every game he's played this season. That's both with Richardson and with Joe Flacco. So even if the passes aren't quite as accurate, considering he's a relatively low average depth of target player, the pass accuracy isn't as important for him as it is the rest of the Colts wide receivers. So I think Downs will continue to have a very high target share in this offense and continue to just get a lot of yards and a lot of receptions, which is what you want, especially in PPR leagues. So I think Downs is still going to be a borderline or even pretty safe fantasy starter, even with Richardson back.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think he's looked good and yeah, provides a nice target in the middle areas of the field there for Anthony Richardson as well, who struggled with some accuracy. So could potentially be a quarterback friendly target there. And we actually did get like a Josh Downs related question. Nate, do you think we should cover this right now?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's
so
fine.
yeah, we got a question. I'm thinking of using my waiver wire on Tank Dell. He's good at running backs. He might be the number 2 waiver wire pickup for this gentleman's league as we wait for a Nico Collins update. The candidate to drop is Josh Downs, as he might be more valuable. Yeah, Josh Downs being more valuable only with Richardson being out. I see. Okay, so he's another person that thinks that, yeah, again, with Anthony Richardson coming in, that Josh Downs' value will go down. So what do you think? Tank Dell or Josh Downs here with the potential Nico Collins missing time?
I'd be fine getting Tank Dell here just because of his talent and the upside of Dell being a top 10 wide receiver. We saw the big games he had last year. Downs is someone who can be in fantasy starting lineups, but I don't see him being a top 10 fantasy receiver just because he has that low average depth of target and isn't going to make a ton of huge plays, where Dell, we know, is capable of making huge plays. We just haven't seen it too much so far this season. So just didn't mention Dell in the article because he's not available in enough leagues, but since he's available in your league, would definitely be fine picking up Dell.
Yep. All right, and let's go to the Dallas Cowboys now, where Brandon Cooks is on IR. I think he just got placed there this week. So Jalen Tolbert's really kind of stepped here. Target 7 catches, 87 yards, and a touchdown, and available in over 90% of ESPN leagues. So how are things looking for Jalen Tolbert's viability going forward?
They're looking pretty good for him. He's been the clear number 3 wide receiver all season, and now that Cooks is out, he's the clear number 2 wide receiver. Had a very good game on Sunday Night Football, so that was great to see. They had a rotation of wide receivers for the 3rd spot, so it's clear that he doesn't really have too much competition outside of CeeDee Lamb, of course, and then Jake Ferguson at tight end, but the Cowboys' passing game should be fairly good over the rest of the season, and Tolbert had been looking better than Cooks over the short term, even with Cooks playing. Cooks was still seeing a little bit more targets, but Tolbert was catching more passes, getting more yards. So it's been a couple weeks now where we've really seen Tolbert kind of step up. So even though he's the 3rd option in the offense, where Juju Smith-Schuster is the 2nd option, Josh Downs arguably the top option in the Colts offense, the only reason Tolbert's 3rd on this list for me is because there are 2 other options in Dallas.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And then we got a couple New England Patriots wide receivers to talk about here. Jalen Polk and Kendrick Bourne, both of these guys available in over 85% of ESPN leagues. And I know Jalen Polk, 6 targets, just the 1 catch, really should have had a touchdown as well with that weird rule of the heel tapping out in the back of the end zone. But 9 targets for somebody like I think it was Demario Douglas, but Kendrick Bourne also kind of getting in here as well, potentially in the near future. So what do you like about these Patriots wide receivers, Nate?
Oh, yeah. First, I think this is the point where it really started to feel like the waiver wires were pretty weird this week. We've had a lot of guys that we've talked about for a number of weeks finally get to a point where they're rostered in enough leagues where we can't talk about them anymore. So a lot of the guys that should be on rosters are on rosters. And at wide receiver, it's getting particularly messy since a lot of guys, it's like, yeah, there's this good thing about them, but there was also this bad thing about them. And with the Patriots wide receivers, there are too many wide receivers for New England now. We finally saw Polk get to 100% of offensive snaps, which was great to see. But we did see Kendrick Bourne come off of his injured list, was rotated in for the first 3 quarters of the game, then didn't really play much in the 4th quarter since I think they were just trying to stick with the same personnel grouping. And the fact that Bourne played at all was good to see out of him, since there were plenty of players who were returned to practice this past week who didn't play at all, or returned to practice and just had a small role in the offense. So the fact that Bourne played significantly at all was good for him. And considering how well Bourne played last year, I think there's a chance that either Polk or Bourne could be the top outside wide receiver for New England going forward. We did see, like you said, Demario Douglas have that good game this week. Concern with Douglas is he's still not playing in 2 wide receiver sets at all. New England still plays a decent amount of 2 wide receiver sets, so I'm always concerned about that playing time for him. And unless you're a team like the Colts who are using a lot of 11 personnel, it's hard to trust someone who is only playing in the slot to play consistently. Perfectly fine with him in best ball or DFS, but I have a hard time starting Douglas at any point in a redraft because of that. So that's why Polk and Bourne are the 2 wide receivers I'm looking at here, but I don't know who will be the top target earner going forward. It could be a split between the 2. So it'll just be, there's a chance that no one will have consistent fantasy value, but the fact that none of these wide receivers are consistently rostered, ideally one player eventually stands out as the number 1 wide receiver, and potentially with a quarterback change that could unleash more fantasy value from the wide receivers.
Yeah, I mean, New England's 1-4 now, right? So yeah, naturally the Drake May discourse is going to start up here. I think he's at least in consideration to be the starter here in week 6. We'll see if anything kind of comes of that here heading into the week, but potential quarterback change, maybe the offense gets a little bit better as well. And then we start to get some value out of these wide receivers. So worth kind of getting into it, getting in on these guys now, if there is a potential for one of them to step up and take over. So in Arizona, we had a fairly quiet Marvin Harrison Jr. day. So someone other than Trey McBride had to step up, and that man was Michael Wilson, who is rostered in just 12% of ESPN leagues. How are we feeling about Michael Wilson and his role going forward in Arizona?
I feel okay about things. He had this good game this past week with 5 receptions for 78 yards. He's had some good games recently, but the concern is they did rotate in their backup wide receivers a bit more this week than they had the previous weeks. Both Zach Pascal and Chris Moore, they had been combining for at most 5 snaps over the first 3 quarters of games over these first couple weeks. But then this last week, both wide receivers saw 5 snaps in those first 3 quarters, or yet. So they were rotated in a bit more. And then Zay Jones was suspended for the first 5 games of the season. Now he is eligible to return. He is probably the biggest competition for Wilson and his playing time. So the fact that he already started to get rotated out a bit more before Jones was coming back was a bit concerning. I'll be curious to see what his playing time looks like going forward. But the fact that he had that 5-catch, 78-yard performance made him one of the highest performing wide receivers this past week among those available on the waiver wire. So I still think he's worth considering because there's a chance that this game was just weird and them rotating the wide receivers out a little more, and potentially he doesn't lose any playing time to Zay Jones. So I think he's at least worth considering because he is a talented young wide receiver, but there is also a chance that he loses a decent amount of playing time and then we end up just dropping him a week later.
Yeah. And then you've highlighted a interesting wide receiver duo here in Indianapolis between Alec Pierce and Adonai Mitchell. Both of these guys also available in about 85% of ESPN leagues. We saw Alec Pierce continues to be a big play monster, 3 catches for 134 yards plus a touchdown, just insane. But then 7 targets for Adonai Mitchell as well. So these Colts wide receivers are getting some work here, Nate, and become of interest for us.
Yeah, so we saw early in the season, both Pierce and Mitchell were seeing significant playing time because Mitchell was playing in the slot with Downs out. But then once Downs was back, we saw Mitchell pretty well relegated to the bench, only saw 20 snaps over the previous 2 games. But then this week, we started seeing Mitchell rotated in a bit more. We saw him playing, basically splitting snaps with Pierce in 12 personnel, cutting into Pierce's playing time in 11 personnel, also still taking some snaps in the slot from Downs and 11 personnel, and then getting the ball a bit more. Saw a number of catches, ran the ball, threw the ball as well. So Mitchell was getting a lot more usage. I was writing the recap article, and I typically start writing that in the third quarter of games, and had written all this nice stuff about Mitchell, and maybe he starts seeing more snaps going forward since Pierce had only caught 2 passes in the previous 2 weeks. And for the first 55 minutes of the game, did not catch a pass in this past week. But then he had the 24-yard catch, 45-yard catch on the following play, leading to a 1-yard touchdown run. And then the following drive caught a 65-yard touchdown pass. So Pierce made it very clear that he was not going away anytime soon. So it's another situation where it's like these are 2 young wide receivers who are playing well. Out of all the wide receivers available, they were 2 of the only players who had any kind of decent week this past week. But it's hard to see that path for playing time because Downs was the first guy we're talking about. I don't see Downs going away. If anything, it needs to be Michael Pittman who should lose playing time. But Pittman, he hasn't lived up to the expectation so far this season, but I don't think he has played so poorly that he deserves to lose playing time. So if anything, they have too many wide receiver options. I guess the only good news is they aren't throwing to their tight ends at all. So that helps keep the target share for the wide receivers high, not throwing too much to the running backs either. So that also helps the target share of all the wide receivers. But I think it's pick up either one of these, pick up both of these guys, and just see what happens over the course of the season. Maybe one of them clearly wins the job, or maybe someone gets injured down the line. But I think there's a chance that one of these wide receivers could have a big season as well.
Nice. I like it. And then another kind of duo here to kind of highlight is in the in Los Angeles with the Rams, guys we've talked about here in the past, Tutu Atwell and Jordan Whittington as well. Both had 10 targets each. Whittington led the team in receiving. Demarcus Robinson scored a touchdown. These guys are heading into a bye week as well, so potential that maybe Cooper Kupp comes back. But Nate, I know you had to start Jordan Whittington this week. Did that work out for you at all?
Yes, it did. I'm in a guillotine league where I only was able to start 2 of the players that I had drafted because of injuries and bye weeks and stuff. So it was an interesting week, but I ended up putting in a lot of players who started the season as backups, and it ended up just fine. I was one of the highest scoring teams of the week. So you had a good call on the start-sit show earlier in the late last week to start Whittington. But both wide receivers had decent games. They've been pretty decent over these past couple weeks, both with target share above 22%, both above 2.1 yards per route run. Both wide receivers have looked fairly good. The only concern is they have their bye week next week, and then Cooper Kupp is expected to be ready to come back the following week. So that is one fewer spot for the wide receivers. Demarcus Robinson started the season as a starter. I don't know if he will just go straight to being a backup or how that rotation will work out between Robinson, Atwell, and Whittington for those last two wide receiver spots. And then Puka Nacua, even if he's not back for week 7, should be back within the next couple of weeks, hopefully. And then that leaves just one spot for Whittington or Atwell or Robinson, or a rotation of the 3. So it's still fine to pick them up because until Puka Nacua is back, at least one of them will continue to see significant playing time, and Cooper Kupp can't see every single target. So a chance that one of them continues to have some good weeks, and there's a chance Cooper Kupp's not back for week 7, in which case both wide receivers will continue to see significant playing time. So neither player is a long-term option, neither player is an option specifically for this upcoming week, but there is still a chance that there is fantasy starter value out of either of these receivers or both of these wide receivers at some point in October.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, there is potential value among the Las Vegas wide receivers here because, again, the Devontae Adams trade rumors continue to swirl here. I mean, it feels like at this point he's going to get traded. We'll see what happens, but was also dealing with the hamstring injury. So we've had to see Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker, who makes the list this week, rostered in 17% of ESPN leagues. What did you see from Trey Tucker of the Las Vegas Raiders this week?
Yeah, Tucker, he started the season as a clear number 3 wide receiver. They were probably the team with the least amount of depth at wide receiver heading into the season. Tried to make some changes. I think Michael Gallup was one of the players on the team, and then he chose to retire. So instead of continuing to add more wide receivers, they just decided to stick with Tucker as the number 3. And then these past couple weeks without Devontae Adams, Tucker's been the clear number 2 wide receiver for the team. Very consistently playing in 11 personnel and 12 personnel. Most of the snaps where he was rotated out were run plays out of 12 personnel. So basically anytime the Raiders are passing the ball, Tucker is on the field. So the fact that you can get a number 2 wide receiver who's available in over 80% of leagues is pretty good to see. And over the past 3 weeks, he has been averaging 14.2 PPR points, ranks among the top 30 wide receivers. So even though he's not the most exciting name and the Raiders offense isn't the most exciting offense, he should still see a decent amount of volume and be the number 3 option in this offense behind Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers.
Yep. Makes sense. And then in Houston, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but Nico Collins appears to be week to week with it was a groin injury, right? Or hamstring. Getting the injuries mixed up, but either way, yeah. Okay. So yeah, it started day to day. Now they're calling it week to week. So the Texans potentially have a wide receiver spot open up. And who did you see kind of step into that role this week, Nate?
It was Xavier Hutchinson. I know Robert Woods has been considered the number 4 wide receiver for Houston, but they really kind of have their wide receivers in specific roles. Nico Collins has been the X receiver for them. Diggs has been the slot, and Dell has been the Z receiver, and Robert Woods has more so been a backup for both Dell and Diggs, where Hutchinson was throughout the preseason an X receiver for them and has been the backup for Nico Collins. So with Collins out, it has been or at least in this game, it was Hutchinson seeing a significant increase in playing time. We did also see Dell see a little bit more playing time in 12 personnel, which was good to see for anyone who has Dell in fantasy. But Hutchinson should have a pretty significant role in this offense going forward as long as Nico Collins is out. I don't know if that'll mean a very high target share because they have other options in the offense, but especially in deep leagues, he's available in 99.9% of ESPN leagues. So if a lot of the guys that we talked about are not available, there's at least one league in mind where I know I'll be starting Hutchinson as long as he's the starter. There's at least a small chance that we see now that they have time to prepare for another game. It's possible Diggs moves back to the outside and they use Robert Woods in the slot. So this isn't a guarantee because Diggs does have that experience as an X receiver at times throughout his career. So a chance they change things up, but I think Hutchinson's probably the safer option for them. That means they don't have to mix up a lot of what they're doing in the offense. So I think Hutchinson's a fine option, especially in those deep leagues.
Yeah, and like you said, widely available here, and yeah, it's sad for me because I keep holding out hope for John Mechie, fellow Canadian, to kind of step in and see a larger role, but doesn't seem to be in the cards here. So, one more wide receiver name, rookie UDFA out of Holy Cross, playing for the Carolina Panthers, Jalen Coker, available in 100% of ESPN leagues. Nate, Jalen Coker had himself an increased role as well this week.
Yeah, I'm sure there's someone out there in ESPN who has them. It's just a rounding issue, but
Yeah.
We saw Xavier Legette suffer a shoulder injury in this game. I do not know the extent of the injury at this point. I haven't heard much from him, and we saw Jonathan Mingo kind of take over as the clear number 2 receiver, and then it was Coker being pretty much the third wide receiver. But in that time, he caught 4 passes for 68 yards, so he was someone who got involved in the offense. Mingo, in his 2 years, he only has 1 game over 68 yards, and that was a 69-yard game. So the fact that we had an undrafted rookie in his first game with any kind of significant playing time get to 68 yards, that's impressive in its own right. So even if Xavier Legette ends up being healthy, maybe Coker has played well enough to earn some more playing time going forward, potentially see snaps above Mingo in that situation. So even if Legette ends up being healthy in some of these deeper leagues, like any rookie who does anything significant is worth at least considering, because maybe there's a chance he ends up being a very good player and we just don't know it yet. So fine taking a chance on Coker in some of those leagues.
Yeah, he's really interesting. He's an interesting prospect too. Like you said, like he's played well when he's been on the field here already. And like I know it was the FCS, but he had some really strong like underlying metrics coming out over the past 2 seasons as a starter as well. 3.11 yards per route run in 2022. 3.51 yards per route run in 2023, along with a 90.6 receiving grade. Again, I know it was FCS, but 26 receiving touchdowns since 2022. And he was the highest graded offensive player for the Carolina Panthers this past week as well. So really interesting numbers for Jalen Coker as a prospect, and now right away kind of getting his first shot in the NFL and performing well. So definitely somebody that's of interest and probably should be rostered in a few more leagues here. Before we go on to the other, actually, we've got a wide receiver question. Okay, so maybe we'll answer a quick wide receiver question, and then we'll move on to the other positions and better help add. So this question says, hey guys, how are you feeling about Andre Yoshivas compared to some of the other wide receivers we've mentioned today? Seems like Yoshivas won't get many targets if Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are healthy. So Yoshivas has a bit of a role in that Bengals offense, Nate. So what's your kind of thoughts on him, I guess?
I think it completely depends on the size of your league. If it's a bigger league, then I'm okay considering him, especially if you have to start a lot of wide receivers. But I view it kind of similarly to how we view Tyler Boyd the last couple of years of, yeah, he's a good handcuff if either of the wide receivers gets injured, and he should see at least some targets in most games, but it probably won't be enough targets for him to ever be in fantasy starting lineups. Like maybe there is some week where he has a really big game, but we won't see it coming ahead of time, so we won't be able to put him in our starting lineups for that week. So I don't see him being someone who consistently sees a lot of targets. So not too excited about him, even though he will probably score a decent amount of fantasy points over the course of the season. Just not enough that you ever want to put him among your top wide receivers on your team.
Makes sense. All right, let's go to the tight ends here in a second. But first, a quick ad break here from our friends at BetterHelp. Hey everyone, this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you'd like, or was that lost in childhood? Kids are always learning and growing, but as adults, sometimes we lose that curiosity. Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder because your back-to-school era could come at any age. Therapy can be really useful to get a better understanding of how your mind actually works and to become more aware of your own patterns of behavior and how to improve them. It's useful for everybody, not just people struggling with something specific. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is a convenient, flexible, and entirely online way to get therapy that's right for you. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you could switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/PFF fantasy to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/PFF fantasy. All right, Nate, let's talk about some tight ends here. And we didn't get to see Taysom Hill last night for the New Orleans Saints going against the Kansas City Chiefs. He's dealing with that ribs injury still. But when we did last see him on the field, he finished as the PPR tight end 5 in week 4, the week that he played and got injured in that week. So we still like the potential here for Taysom Hill if and when he comes back on the field.
Yeah, it was pretty clear they missed him last night. And like you said, last time we saw him, he scored those 2 touchdowns, was playing 15 of a possible 25 snaps before the injury as well. So that he's seeing more playing time than he had been seeing any of the past years with the Saints outside of when he was the clear quarterback of the team. So he's getting rotated in more often, touching the football more often. We saw this in the preseason as well. He was used heavily whenever they were using their starters. So I think Hill, if he can stay healthy, he will have a significant role in this offense. Still ranks among the top, I believe, 12 tight ends in fantasy points per game, despite the fact that he has missed a lot of time in a lot of the games that he has played. So considering the tight end situation in the league, I think Hill can probably be in fantasy starting lineups once he gets healthy. It's just a matter of when he gets healthy. But I think just having Hill at the top also kind of speaks to the depth of tight end on the waiver wire currently.
Yeah, there's definitely some options there, and one of those options in Tampa Bay, Cade Otton, who is available in just over 80% of leagues, and already has 2 top 10 PPR finishes this season. So the playing time is there, the potential is there, and again, at a position that's disappointed so far this season, we're still feeling pretty good about Cade Otton.
Yeah, I think not knowing the extent of Hill's injury for this upcoming week, if you need a tight end off the waiver wire to put in your starting lineup this week, Otton's the pretty clear guy for me. He is seeing the playing time, played 100% of snaps this past week, has very consistently played over 90+% of the offensive snaps. He's rarely leaving the field. You can't say that about most tight ends in the league right now. So he is at least getting the playing time, and at least recently he's been seeing a decent amount of targets as well. 16 targets over the past 3 weeks. That's the best 3-game stretch of his entire career. So that's been good to see out of him. Didn't have the best week this past week, but is coming off a season high 70.4 PFF game grade. So also grading better than what we've seen in the past as well. So I think there's a chance he is a still fairly young tight end who has gotten a lot of playing time. A chance he continues to improve as a tight end as well. A chance that he becomes a fantasy start over the rest of the season. So out of all the traditional tight ends off the waiver wire, he is by far the one that I would consider over everyone else.
Nice. So how about a couple of deeper options here, guys that are available in over 90% of leagues? The first one is one that we've had on the list before, Noah Fant of the Seattle Seahawks.
Oh, yeah. Fant this past week, it was pretty good to see him get a pretty significant jump in playing time. We had seen him in the first 2 weeks of the season play a lot more than we ever saw last season, but Pharaoh Brown had been out with an injury. And then once Brown was back in week 3, we saw Noah Fant rarely play in 12 personnel and still getting rotated out a decent amount in 11 personnel, which really wasn't great to see. It was a role worse than what he had for a lot of last season. But then slowly but surely, he's gained his snaps back, played 70% of snaps in 11 personnel, which isn't perfect, but definitely a big step in the right direction. And then played 2/3 of the 12 personnel snaps. All 3 of the tight ends took 2/3 of the snaps. So a lot more in 12 personnel as well. So that was also very good to see. Still not seeing a ton of targets, and I don't know if the targets are going to get there as long as DK Metcalf and Jackson Smith-Njigba and Tyler Lockett are all healthy. But I do think Fant is someone where if any of the 3 wide receivers suffers an injury, Fant should see a decent amount of bump in target share, which could get him to the point of being a fantasy starter.
Nice. Makes sense. And then I like this one here as a speculative ad as well, Nate. You included Eric All, the rookie tight end for the Cincinnati Bengals, who's available in over 95% of ESPN leagues. What did you see from his usage this past week?
Oh, yeah. Now that we're about a third into this season, I'm trying to include a couple of guys that you're not considering him anytime in the near future, but more of a speculative ad for what could happen over the second half of the season. And I think Eric All fits that description. He is someone who has consistently been playing in 12 personnel throughout the season, 88.8% of possible snaps over the season. Typically, it's been Drew Sample as the other tight end. in 12 personnel. So out of the two, if they're going to be throwing the ball, All would be the one running the route and potentially getting a target. And in 11 personnel, we have seen his playing time just slowly but steadily increase every single week so far this season. That also includes more passing plays out of 11 personnel each week as well. That's cutting into Mike Gesicki's playing time a little bit each week. Still, we're seeing Mike Gesicki run more routes and get more playing time in 11 personnel. But if Eric All continues to play well, he has graded better as a receiving tight end so far this season. Over the first 4 weeks, was among the highest graded tight ends in receiving. He had the 8th highest receiving grade with all the tight ends with at least 10 targets. 6 of the 7 ahead of him are the guys that you would expect that are clear fantasy starters who are scoring a lot of fantasy points, and then Noah Gray as well, which is another interesting name with how much he's playing in Kansas City. But I think All has played well, and there's the path to him getting more playing time. So odd chance he becomes the main tight end for Cincinnati over the second half of the season. And hopefully by that point in time, the Bengals start winning some more games.
Yeah, you would hope so. Yeah, I mean, the offense is playing well, right? Like, and that's why I kind of like this as like a speculative ad as well, because All like hasn't blown up on the stat sheet yet. So it's, he's at the point where fantasy managers maybe aren't digging in too much to him, but kind of slowly trending up in terms of usage, like you said, on a good offense. I think, could be a usable weapon for us in the latter half of the year, or at the very least, could be a nice kind of buy low trade target in Dynasty right now as well. So another one of those Iowa tight ends as well, which, they've had a pretty good track record there. All right, let's talk about some wide receiver or some quarterbacks. Sorry, here on the waiver wire, because no Patrick Mahomes this week, no Sam Darnold, no Matthew Stafford, no Miami quarterback. We'll start with a couple names that are mostly just barely making the cut here this week, Nate, because they're pretty close to 50% rostership. Caleb Williams of the Chicago Bears and Kirk Cousins of the Atlanta Falcons. So you could touch on these guys here, because they did make the cut this week.
Oh, yeah. Typically, I cut it off at 50%, and even some guys who are borderline 50%, I tend not to include. But both guys right around 45% rostership, both guys who were drafted to be high-end backup quarterbacks throughout the fantasy season who just didn't have great starts to the season and have started to turn things around recently. Caleb Williams, for a couple weeks now, has been playing well. And then Kirk Cousins, that huge game on Thursday Night Football. Both quarterbacks I expect to be playing well over the rest of the season. Should still be clear fantasy backups or starters, depending if they're in the right matchup. So if they're available in your league, they are the best options at quarterback, even though there's going to probably be most of the people listening to this, they probably aren't available in your leagues.
Yeah, but good call outs there, just in case. And then Derek Carr is on the list again. We know that, he played last night, left the game. Jay Kaner had to come in and finish the game for him. So we don't know exactly the extent of the injury just yet, I don't think, unless something came out while we were recording here. But yeah, so 65% available Derek Carr of the New Orleans Saints. Still feeling like he could be a good waiver wire option right now.
Oh, yeah, he's getting an MRI today, I believe, so we'll find out the extent of the injury at some point today, hopefully before you have to make your waiver wire decisions. But Carr had that great start to the season, hasn't quite played as well recently. The big thing with him, and why I included him this week, is they're playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week. Tampa Bay has allowed the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks, so if there was anyone that to put in your lineup specifically this week, Carr was the guy that I was considering. But if he's going to miss some time, if he's going to miss this week, then I'm probably fine leaving him on the waiver wire. They do have some pretty nice matchups throughout the rest of the season, so also fine stashing him if you're in a big enough league and need a backup quarterback there. But I primarily included him on this list because of this week, had it not been for the injury.
Yeah, would have made sense. Tampa Bay just given up over 500 yards to Kirk Cousins and company. So, and then one of the other names here, Trevor Lawrence of the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jags actually won a game, and Trevor Lawrence looked good. And he's available in over 65% of leagues right now.
Completed 28 of 34 passes, 371 yards, 2 touchdowns. So that was great to see. He's someone that we know has had like hot streaks and cold streaks throughout his career. Started the season on the cold streak. This could be the start of a hot streak. We have seen Brian Thomas Jr. play very well, so that's definitely helped Lawrence. Evan Ingram is expected to be back this upcoming week, so that should also be a boost to the offense. So I think Lawrence can kind of get back to the quarterback that we were hoping he would be. Or at least the last 2 seasons, we've seen kind of had cold starts and then play really well over the second half of the season. Still think that's within the realm of possibility for Lawrence as well. So I think he's kind of back to the player that we thought he'd be at the start of the season. And that's one of the more high-end backups you can have in fantasy.
Nice. And then Tua Tagovailoa nearing a return here. They're heading into the bye week, so probably going to miss another week, I think, after that. But getting pretty close. Mike McDonald said that he's still got to, clear a couple more tests, and hopefully he could stay healthy because we've seen him be a very good fantasy quarterback when he's in the lineup.
Oh, yeah. Like you said, at minimum, they have the bye week, and he needs to spend at least one more week on injured reserve by the rules of injured reserve. So we know he's not going to be back for at least these next 2 weeks. The good news is he has been symptom-free of the concussion, so that has been good to see. I still think he's still visiting with experts and making sure that everything is good to go, but it sounds like he does want to at least continue his career. So that's been good to see. He was a top 10 fantasy quarterback in week 1. He was the 9th most fantasy points for a quarterback last season. So he's basically been a fantasy starter for most of the past 2 years whenever he's been healthy. So I think there's a chance he gets back to that. We've seen what the offense looks like without him. We know how valuable he is to the offense, and that's become even more true these past couple weeks. So I think Miami, once he's back at quarterback, ideally the running backs are all healthy at that point as well, and hopefully we can see this offense get right back on track once Tua is back. So I'd much rather pick him up now before everyone starts to realize he's coming back, and everyone else will probably want him at that point. So better to stash him on your roster for a couple weeks before anyone else gets to him.
Yeah, absolutely. Just need him to stay healthy. Wear the freaking Guardian cap, whatever it takes. Just stay on the field here. We need Tua to stay healthy, and I mean we need it for Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle as well, but for his sake mostly. And then a couple other names here for some deeper leagues. Daniel Jones, I think 3 top 12 quarterback finishes already this season, Nate, here for the New York Giants. So pretty widely available. Daniel Jones has performed pretty well for us.
Yeah, ranks 20th among quarterbacks in fantasy points so far this season. So not the most exciting, but definitely doing better than what his rostership percentage suggests. He had that one season as a top 12 fantasy quarterback in large part with his rushing ability. He's still running the ball a lot more than most quarterbacks. And this past week was particularly impressive because Malik Neighbors was out with injury. Devin Singletary was out with injury. And he still threw for 257 yards and 2 touchdowns with Darius Slayton stepping up. So I think he can still be a quarterback who sees a lot of passing volume, a lot of rushing volume as well. Probably not someone I'm starting in most matchups, but I think in the right matchup, he can be a fantasy starter. And especially with these bye weeks, he's someone that can fill in your roster for 1 week at the very least, and is available in a lot more leagues than the 4 quarterbacks we've already talked about.
Nice. Yeah, going against the Cincinnati Bengals on Sunday Night Football as well. So not the worst matchup for Daniel Jones. And then the last name here, again, for those deeper leagues, Will Levis of the Tennessee Titans. They're coming out of the bye week. We know that, he didn't finish the last game that they were in, but it's had quite a bit of time here to kind of heal up and get healthy. How are you feeling about Will Levis, who is available in over 95% of leagues right now?
Oh, yeah. So Levis is the player at quarterback where I'm not probably starting him this week or these next couple weeks. For me, this is picking him up in the case that he starts playing better, because looking at the schedule from weeks 12 to week 17, they play the Jaguars twice, the Colts, the Commanders, the Texans, and the Bengals. That gives them 4 games against teams that are among the top 4 in allowing fantasy points to quarterbacks. The other 2 matchups against the 7th most and 14th most. So that schedule over that 6-game stretch leading up to the fantasy playoffs and during the fantasy playoffs is about as good as you can possibly expect for a quarterback. And in these first 4 games, he's faced the 3 teams that have allowed the fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. Part of that's because they all faced Levis, but there's a chance that he turns things around over the course of the season. He has a new head coach, new wide receivers in the offense. So it's understandable that it could take some time for him to gain some chemistry with the players and get more comfortable in the offense and everything. So definitely not looking to start him in the near future, but if they start to turn things around in October, early November, the schedule is so good that if he starts playing a little bit better, the opponents will help him look even better than that there's a chance he becomes a fantasy starter down the stretch. Probably not the most likely scenario, but at the possibility that it happens, you can get a league winner very cheap right now.
Yeah, I mean, we like the potential of Will Levis coming into the season, right? It was a good offense, new head coach, all that stuff kind of coming in here. It's good arm strength, and I know like it's been a pretty embarrassing start to the season. He's made a meme of himself in several games here, but we don't really care for fantasy as long as he's able to turn it around. And there's definitely some potential there, Nate. So yeah, I don't mind the call here for later in the season if the Titans offense is able to turn things around. So other than that, we did get a couple questions in. Anything that we should be answering here before we close out the show? What do I got?
There's the Drake May one on Calvin Ridley. Can we talk about Chase Brown?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, sorry, I missed the Drake May one. Yeah, Super League. Heard Drake May about to start. My quarterback is Aaron Rodgers, Justin Fields, and Tua Tagovailoa. If Quincy Davis here is wanting to add Drake May, any of those three quarterbacks that you're dropping to get a shot at Drake?
I would probably ideally drop someone else outside of that. I'm not sure I'm dropping any of these three quarterbacks for him. If anyone, it's Aaron Rodgers, just because I don't think Rodgers has that potential to be in the top 10, where Drake May is at least an unknown. Maybe there's a chance he ends up playing really well. But even once May is the starter, at least over these next couple weeks, if I find out he's the starter this week, for example, I'm still probably ranking Rodgers and Fields above May, at least for the immediate future and possibly the entire season. So ideally, you're dropping someone else. But if there's not enough bench spots or you need the backups at the other positions, then I'm probably just leaving May on the waiver wire. But I wouldn't be surprised if someone picks him up. Given that it's a super flex league, it's kind of surprising no one else has him on the roster. So that suggests to me that there's not very many bench spots. So you might not have the spot for May because I'm probably still keeping the other three quarterbacks.
Yep, makes sense. And then we just talked about Will Levis, but one of Will Levis's, his top weapon here, Calvin Ridley, available for Rayan here. How much fab would you spend on Calvin Ridley in a half-point PPR league, Nate?
Probably not a ton. The fact that he's available at all means someone probably dropped him. So I don't see many people trying to pick him up because he hasn't had the greatest season so far, and they have a lot of different weapons in Tennessee. So I don't know how much Ridley is going to pick things up over the rest of the season. Like I said, they have that good schedule, but I think the fact that he is available at all means that you probably don't need to spend a lot to pick him up. So I probably would only spend 5 to 10% on him.
Makes sense. And then the last question here is, what are we thinking about Chase Brown, and would you start him over Ramondre Stevenson? I don't know if this is, I guess we'll just treat it as this week. But yeah, Chase Brown increasing his role here a little bit in the Bengals offense. And we know we just talked about Ramondre Stevenson earlier, who was quote unquote benched this week.
Yeah, so I don't remember the opponents for this next week, so I'm not sure about starting and setting them, but Chase Brown in general has looked very good as a runner. I think has earned more playing time as a runner. And then we did see Zach Moss get injured. He returned briefly, but it was Chase Brown throughout overtime and the 2-minute drill as well. So I haven't heard much haven't heard much about Moss. But I'm going to stop the question there because there is breaking news. The Jets have fired Robert Saleh.
That's crazy. Jets 2-3, firing Robert Saleh. So interesting. So they'll be playing Monday Night Football against the Bills, and we'll have a new head coach. Not sure what happened there. I know that there had been like some talks of him potentially being fired kind of like just recently, but I didn't really kind of buy it as something serious. I guess that's it for Robert Saleh, who, good defensive coach, but obviously maybe struggling here with the offense a little bit. So I'm not sure.
To me, that feels like he lost the power struggle with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, that's it's
my interpretation of it. So like there hasn't been a named replacement coach. I would not be surprised if Nathaniel Hackett is the guy because he has head coaching experience, which would probably make Rodgers happy, but we'll find out soon. I don't know if this really impacts much in terms of fantasy football because like they're still going to keep the same scheme. I assume they'll probably keep most of the same coaches on defense. I don't typically when a head coach is fired, they aren't going to be changing a whole lot. So I don't think this probably impacts what I think of anyone on the Jets unless they bring in someone from the outside. But that is not the common thing when a coach is fired midseason.
Yeah, and it would make sense that it's Hackett. I don't think I'd be surprised at all, especially considering his relationship with Aaron Rodgers. And yeah, it did seem like there was a little bit kind of going on between Saleh and Rodgers. Some comments I think after that London game as well, with regarding the pick six and stuff like that for Aaron Rodgers. So who knows? What happened kind of behind the scenes there. But yeah, Robert Saleh out in New York, and we'll see what happens officially with who they name. But yeah, I imagine it's going to be Nathaniel Hackett.
Just like scrolling through their coaching staff, a lot of guys like with experience, but I don't think there's anyone that has a whole lot of like head coach experience or even that much coordinator experience. So
yeah,
I think it's pretty clearly Hackett would be the guy that makes sense.
Yeah, wouldn't be surprised at all. But yeah, they have a little bit extra time to prep for this week's game because they play on Monday. But at least with Hackett coming in, he has the familiarity with the offense anyway. So yeah, I'm with you. I don't expect like it to necessarily make too many changes, but we'll see. We'll see how things shake out there. But yeah, they got to figure out something. Maybe they trade for Devontae Adams too, and it'll just get all kinds of craziness for the New York Jets. But anything else for this episode, Nate, before we wrap it up?
Just Jeff Albright, the only other guy, their defensive coordinator. He did spend a year as an assistant head coach with the Falcons and has been a coordinator for the past 4 or 5 years. So like maybe him, but
right.
Yeah, that's the only other guy on the staff that stood out to me.
Interesting stuff there with the New York Football Jets. But that's going to do it for us today. We'll see how that all plays out as the week goes on. But thank you all for tuning in, for getting the questions in there as well. So make sure you get out to those waiver wires and get your claims and stay active all season long. And we will continue to offer you some waiver wire targets every single week. Shout out to the PFF data collection team as well for putting a lot of our underlying metrics together that we can reference. There is no better team in the multiverse. So shout out to them. And a shout out to Nate as well for putting this big list together. Nate, before we go, please remind everybody what else you have going on this week on pff.com.
Sure. So I have the recap articles that have been up, the waiver article, like we've talked about today. I had 5 to add, 5 to drop, 5 to buy low, 5 to sell high, rest of season rankings. And then after this, I'll start to put together my week 6 rankings. So that'll be up in a couple of hours from now. And then we'll have start set up later in the week as well.
Very nice. Yeah. And then as for me, I'll have the IDP fantasy report out. That'll be out later today. That'll have all the IDP waiver wire targets in there. Wide receiver man zone coverage report will be out. IDP rankings, O-line, D-line matchups to target and avoid. I'll be back in the podcast feed doing the week 6 IDP preview. That'll be out a day earlier than usual, probably be out Wednesday. And then our week 6 start sit show with Nick Bodiford as well. That'll be out likely Thursday morning. We're recording a little bit earlier for those two this week. But be sure to check them out. And until next time, peace out.